didn't think I was going to be here, and I still have ways to go. I'm still trying to make waves in California. I'm still reaching out to people saying, what's next? How can I get this contract in this country or in this specific district? What do I have to do to put myself in those places? I'm doing it by myself, meaning I'm in front of a computer. I'm doing the research. I'm reaching out to people who love my work, and I'm saying, hey, please send me to the right place. But I know in the back of people's minds, they're thinking this is impossible. And in my mind, I'm like, it's possible. And when I do it, you'll see the tweet about it.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, George Valenzuela.
This is education coach George Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We're here today with my very good friend, Yaritza Villalba. Yaritza is a well-known education consultant, speaker, and author. She's so talented and such an inspiration, I had to get her back on the show. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hyped to be back. I'm ready to discuss all things that have progressed throughout these few months. Thanks for having me.
As I said, this is your second time on the show, so I'm changing up the format so we can catch up on all the great things you're doing. Yaritza, you're already well known, but give us your backstory. How did you get into education, and what steps did you take to get where you are today?
I was an immigrant. My family migrated here in 91. Off the bat, it was just like my responsibility as a kid was to just make sure everything I had learned at home was literally transpired in school, but everything that I had learned in school, I had to make sure that I was bringing it home for the adults in the family. I quickly began to love the idea of sharing information. As I was growing up, my sister would play school with us. And of course, my brother thought it was boring, but I always was amazed at how she would just chunk everything for me to be able to comprehend it in an easy way. While I was in elementary school, I was already focusing on junior high school and middle school curricula. And then I knew I was going to be a teacher. Once I graduated with my bachelor's, like literally I graduated in May. I started teaching November while I was getting my first master's.
Wow.
I already knew I was going to get into teaching and education.
Wow.
Let me break it down, because if you would have asked me 4 years ago if I'd be in this role as an entrepreneur, as an education coach, as a global innovator, I would have probably laughed and was like, yeah, no, I'm not ever leaving the classroom. But during the pandemic, I began to share ideas for culturally responsive teaching and project-based learning. I caught the attention of Microsoft Flipgrid. At that time, it was Flipgrid. I remember tweeting and saying, hey, I think it's finally my time to assume a part-time position in ed tech. And I began to receive dozens of DMs from ed tech companies. The company that stood out to me the most was Flip, because I was using it on a daily basis with my students. I knew whatever the task was, I was going to be able to execute it because my students loved it, just because it enabled us to not only use different languages, appreciate culture, but I was having my students create rap battles and stuff virtually. When I responded to their DM, they had already had this huge idea of what they wanted to do for my brand and for my work. And that was a show. We created a show called Ask Yaritza, where educators around the world would ask me questions on culturally responsive teaching. And then every week I would funnel through all of those questions, and then I would choose one to answer on a Monday. I would bring on whoever I believed in the ed tech space were the champions of that topic. So whether if it was Victor Hicks in computer science, or I would reach out to someone else and I would say, hey, I have this question. It is totally aligned with what you're currently doing in the classroom or with the district. And I would love for you to spend 15 minutes with me highlighting and giving teachers suggestions on how they can do this in the class. And then every Friday, I would type up a blog post so that way teachers could have links to whatever was shared on that Monday. Then I began to just discuss what I was doing with other ed tech companies, basically saying, hey, I'm still available to do this on a larger scale. Surprisingly, was hired for different presentations virtually with other ed tech companies. Flip supported it 100%. They never said, hey, we don't want you to work with these companies. It was more like, you have information that the world needs to know about. So whenever you have time, put it out there. I began to do more podcast interviews like your own, then it just, I don't know, it just grew. I guess the question I always asked myself was, if I can do this for someone else, how awesome would it be to do it for myself? That's how I got here today with being the CEO of McKinsey's Adventures.
Hey, y'all, everyone out there listening. The reason why we ask entrepreneurs about their journey is because everyone keeps asking me that every day in my DMs, phone calls, emails, in person, online. So it's an important topic for a lot of people. And that's why we ask entrepreneurs. However, some of the concepts are universal. Mm-hmm. For example, Yaritza put herself out online. She made a post and she declared herself ready. People believed in her and they reached back out to her. That's a universal concept. Mm-hmm. You say, hey, I'm ready to do this, and you might get some responses. However, there's no blueprint for this.
Right.
There's no one way to do it. Passion must be there, having expertise, and then your charisma and your connections and being informed about a hot topic at the time is going to make you hot.
Yeah.
So don't go out there and do the same post. Well, I'm really great at culturally responsive and I'm ready to, it ain't going to pop like that. No, it doesn't work that way.
Not at all. And for a year prior to that, I was already giving out free information. So I had started my nonprofit, YV Educational Resources. And so for a year before that leap, I was creating resources and I was sending it out and sharing it out with educators around the world for free. I would do 3 sessions, summer PD, where I would host at least 100 educators from around the world each session on SEL, parent engagement and culturally responsive teaching. No one paid me to do that. I would get grants and literally people would donate money to my nonprofit. And I would send swag to educators around the world from that money. If you're trying to get into ed tech or you're trying to get into educational coaching or administrative coaching, just think about how you're putting yourself out there before that tweet, right? So before that tweet, I was already doing the work. That tweet was just more of, I don't want to leave the classroom, but I do want to dig deeper into this whole new space of ed tech.
Such valuable advice. Folks out there, listen to our nuggets. You have to put the horse before the cart. If you put the cart first, there's not going to be a horse to pull it.
That's right.
Think about what I just said. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that's easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience, so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have him come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
Are technology issues slowing you down at your school? If that's the case, look no further than 5-Star Technology's Virtual Help Desk. Their team of experts are available to support you remotely, resolving up to 40% of common issues, like password resets, device connectivity, and lots more. With just a few clicks, you'll have access to their live chat from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. Just enter your email to get started. Then you'll live chat with one of 5-Star's EdTech experts to diagnose your problem. And if their virtual help desk agent can't solve the issue completely, they will dispatch the ticket to your school's on-site tech team. Let 5-Star Technology Solutions be your support partner. Experience our virtual help desk, which is affordable, efficient, and always there for you. Please contact them at 5startech.com/contact us. Once again, 5startech.com/contact us. And for your convenience, you'll find this link in the episode show notes. Yaritza, you're doing a lot of work with project-based learning, PBL. What's the primary message of your PBL coaching?
It has to remain student-centered. A lot of my work, when I was in a classroom, I taught overage undercredited students. These were students who experienced failure back to back to back. The question that I would always ask is why? I never place blame on the students. I would never say, hey, it's because of reader comprehension, it's because of your test scores. I would always say, why? To fail twice and then eventually get it right is okay. Maybe you learned from that second failure. But to do so and spend 8 years in high school when it should only take 4, the question is, where we as the educators are going wrong. I knew to look at the curricula. I looked at pedagogy. I looked at what were students exposed to before? What were their experiences like? I had the kind of students who I would always say, they didn't hold back. When you asked them information, they would tell you everything down to the teacher's first and last name if they had kids. Like, that's our kids. When they love you, they'll tell you everything.
It's at New York.
Yeah, it's New York.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, I'm going to tell you why I failed, right? That's how the kids And there was one thing that had always come up, and it was, Miss, I don't understand it. And I would say, you don't understand history? And they're like, I don't understand none of it. And I would say, that's weird, because with history, you want to feel a part of it. You want someone to be able to say, hey, around this era, this is what women were doing, or this is what African Americans were doing. This is what Latinos were doing. There's always should be that connection of during history, this is what a specific group of people were doing at this time. How does that impact life today? And so you always make that connection. My students, they weren't able to because no one exposed them to what people who look like them and people who have the same cultural backgrounds as them were doing during those eras. And so I knew to change what I was doing, but also in a way where it was engaging. My students were at the center. They were at the heart of every single project, whether if it was us selling cars during the 1920s and me asking them to think about what Henry Ford might have thought about with the process. And my students would code. We would code Legos cars, and they would then have to become car salesmen. So you're doing your history, you're doing your research, you're trying to figure out why Henry Ford created this cheap, affordable car, at whose expense, who was working in these factories, how were African Americans being treated, how were the Irish being treated. And then when we're having these conversations, they're acting as salesmen or salespeople, and I'm asking specific questions tailored to the curriculum. They're having fun with it. They think they're just selling me their Lego car. And for me, it's, I need to know if you understand its historical significance, and then we're going to tie it into interchangeable car parts and what other things today is used during that assembly line. And I learned from my students the importance of PBL. And now that I'm an instructional coach or educational coach, I start with that first question. How are students at the center of this? So if you created this project, you as a teacher, and you did not think about students at all, that is not PBL. For me, that is just a regular project. But if your students are at the heart of it from the start to finish, you're thinking about those summative assessments. You're thinking about how we're going to get to the end. You're thinking about what questions we need to ask, what resources each individual student is going to need in order to complete this. To me, that's PBL.
Project management, action planning, systems, frameworks, tools, resources. Oh, with students at the center. Wow. Yeah. So often overlooked, but so important, especially for babies who don't have knowledge of self.
Right.
They don't have knowledge of self by design.
Right.
By design. Yaritza, your PBL work is international. You've gone to Singapore now.
Yeah.
Yo, congrats.
Thank you.
How do you tailor your workshop to address different contexts or cultures, especially when working overseas?
I'll give the example of the Singapore American School because they have been awesome. Working with David has been amazing. It's naturally so because they're open-minded. Sometimes people want to hire educational coaches or consultants, and they have this set mindset on how things should be.
Mm.
With David and with SAS, they were more like, you're the expert. What do we need? How much time do you need for this? What are our steps? Singapore American School, like many other schools, have tried PBL before, right? They have tried it. They have probably experienced professional development. They've had coaching in the past. But what a lot of folks don't understand is you can't receive coaching twice and then call yourself an expert in PBL. It takes a lot of months or even up to years to perfect what PBL looks like.
It took me 10 years.
Listen.
It took me 10 years to write my PBL Plus book.
Yeah.
It took 10 years of data collections and being around the country and being in all urban, all Caucasian American, all Hispanic or Latino American, low performing, high performing, rural, inner city to understand that it's not one size fits all. It's student centered. And because it's student centered, the students dictate the context. And so does your local data and workforce opportunities and things like that. People don't get that though.
Yeah. No, of course not. Of course not. I have this unit plan template that I usually share with schools that I consult with. And one of the questions, so after I ask what's the theme of the unit, all of the nice flowery stuff.
Educator stuff.
Right. Then I ask about students' culture. And I ask, what is it that we should know about students' culture prior to this lesson? What relationships do you have with students prior to this lesson? And that's usually what schools leave blank. They leave it blank because they don't know much about their students beyond assessment data. In order for me to create any kind of curricula, any unit plan, any resources for your specific group of students, I have to get to know the students. And if it's a situation where I'm planning while I'm home before I get to your school, wherever that is in the world, I need to start off with something. I need a basis. Who are your students? What do they like to do? What kinds of music do they need to listen to? And if we don't know about the students, then, okay, let's focus on the educators. Who are your educators? What do they like to do after work? What music do they listen to? What do they eat? I take those pieces of knowledge and I use that for my basis of examples for whatever we're doing. So if it's robotics, if it's computer science, with SAS in particular, we looked at the PBL tasks that they had already created and the unit plans they had already created. Some we threw away, right? Because now we have to start over because this doesn't align with what PBL is. Others, all right, you completed it, let's execute it. What does this look like in the classroom? Can I go into the classroom and actually see this in action? With that particular experience, I loved it because I was able to provide professional development for admins separately, educators separately, lead educators separately, and even go into thinking about parents and what they understand about PBL. When I've seen PBL professional development before, I haven't seen anyone really dive in and was able to do it in 2 days. I did it in 2 days in Singapore, and then I was able to come home and then support virtually, right? So I'm planting the seeds. I'm giving you some time to take it all in because it can be frustrating when you're learning something new or when you're trying to unlearn how someone else has taught you how to do it and then learn what this new person is saying. No, we're going to do it a much easier way. And that was my take on it. I kept saying, there's a much easier way to do this. There's a much easier way to do this. Hold up, calm down, put down the book. You know your content already. How can we make sure that every student's needs are met during this PBL task? You know your content already. That's given. But now, what are these strategies that you're using? Is SEL incorporated with this? How are we really going to make sure that your students are going to come out of this PBL making connections to the real world?
I didn't mean for this to be a plug for PBL Plus. Project-Based Learning Plus is my brand of PBL. And in my brand, it does two things. It helps teachers with core instruction. Visiting schools for 10 years, as I mentioned, I've realized that a lot of teachers may not have the pedagogy, may not have the understanding of the fundamentals of instruction. And so the book, it provides that. But for young people, it's essential life skills. Yes, SEL does offer life skills, but so does knowledge of self. And so does career readiness. One of the projects that's in the book, it's actually a mural design where all the kids in the class, they each contribute to the mural by identifying things about themselves and about their home life or their culture. That way, it serves as a way to build empathy and establish a class that's multicultural. And that should be, in my opinion, one of the first steps to building a climate and culture that's inclusive and for everyone.
Oh, of course. George, I give the same advice to people. I say the beginning of the school year should never be a pre-assessment on content. The beginning of the school year should always be based off relationship building. I need to get to know you. I need to know your likes, your dislikes, and I need to do so in a way where you're not just answering questions and putting on an index card that I'm going to forget about. Because we remember those times, right? Teaching and students are writing the same things down on an index card and you put it in your desk. And then at the end of the school year, you remember that kids warned you about their dislikes, and yet you spent the whole year doing it because you forgot to go back to those cards. And that's exactly what your activities literally speak on, right? The idea of relationship building, getting to the core of who your students are, and then everything else would be seamless.
Yeah, it's knowing them as people, but knowing them as learners. Monitoring your impact is not just about knowing what they like or don't like, it's knowing how they learn best.
Yes. Yes.
And now for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to communicate better and even deal with social emotional stuff. They're having a bad day. A SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
Please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with SmartLab. Let's talk about your new book, Mackenzie and the Secret Library of Banned Books. Yaritza, it's selling out everywhere. Again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Would you mind if I read an excerpt from your book?
Yes, of course.
I got to break out the reading glasses. Don't judge me because Yaritza is the only person, she's the only person other than my kids who calls me an old man and gets away with it. It's part of your dedication. To all the children around the world, this book is for you. You are the future of our planet, and you deserve to learn, grow, and thrive in a world that respects and celebrates your true history and culture. You have the power to challenge the systems and authorities that try to silence or erase your voices and stories. You have the courage to stand up for your rights and dignity and to support others who do the same. You have the creativity to imagine and build a better world for yourselves and generations to come. This book is a tribute to your resilience, your curiosity, and your joy. It is a reminder that you are not alone and that you have a community of people who care about you and your dreams. It is an invitation to explore, discover, and share the books that inspire you and reflect your experiences. This book is dedicated to you with love and hope. Now, this is powerful. Would you mind expanding on this and why you wrote this book?
Oh, yeah. My eyes are getting teary as if I didn't write it. At the moment, our students are dealing with a lot of trauma, whether if it's turning on your TV and you're seeing women around the world having their rights stripped, whether if it's to go to school or whether if it's religion playing a major role in why there's conflict that exists. And now in the United States, they're having their rights stripped as to access of books. When I was growing up, I was able to choose what books I wanted to read. I had teachers who always influenced me to go to the library. Hey, go to the library. If you're done with your work, go downstairs, go to the library, get a book, read that book, right? And now students don't have much choice in the books that they have access to or the books that they can read. I remember just thinking about Mackenzie's Adventures, right? This is a book series where, if you've heard my story, I've always said I wrote it with my daughter in mind. And the idea is that she's taken all of these different journeys and she's tackling things that are going on around the world. And I felt like it was necessary for her to tackle these banned books, these legislations that are limiting our students' access to reading books that reflect who they are as individuals. Why not do it in a book? Why not highlight these books that have been banned and put them all in one book and say, hey, if you can't read it in your school, then you can read this book and you can make the decision whether or not you want to take that extra step to read the book by reading like a summary of it. As I was writing this book, I kept researching what are the books that have been added to this list. Who are the authors? What can I learn about the authors who are mostly people of color? People of color. And why have these books made this list? That's what this book is. It's like a way around not being able to read the books that makes us happy.
Yeah. I love that you're tackling something that you're passionate about and other people as well.
Yeah.
Yaritza, what's next on your writing journey? What's your next book about?
It's about project-based learning.
That's what I'm talking about, Yaritza. That's what I'm talking about. That's the book the world needs from you next, because you're going to Singapore. You're going international. You've been to Alaska. You're going to places where the average PBL coach hasn't gone, isn't going. Now we need you to take your experiences and include that in. Everyone that's familiar with this podcast knows that my culture is hip hop. It's hip hop because I grew up in New York and I didn't have a traditional family. I was in a group home. I was in foster care. So my culture became the culture of the kids at school. That's why on my personal Instagram, Rakim, the rapper, is the picture of my profile, because the first knowledge of self I got was from his music. I didn't know who I was or where my people were from because I was young and in a group home. So I didn't understand about my heritage, my ethnicity, which is Hispanic American. But that is a culture that I'm very comfortable with. Hip hop provides a framework for how me and my friends socialize. For example, music, sports, fashion. These are the things that are within the framework. Anyways, as a traveler around the country and parts of the world, I start realizing that hip hop is not the prevalent culture in the world.
Right.
And there's a lot of people out there. And how could we not love those people and care about those people? So when we bring project-based learning and our pedagogy and our experiences, how we tailor that and how we present that, it's so important. Not eliminating culture,
Right.
not eliminating theirs or their children or even ours, but what's relevant in Rome may not be relevant in Virginia.
Right.
And people need to understand that. And that's why we need your book.
Yeah, and listen, it's coming. It's coming. One nugget I would love to share is just that when I'm traveling, I always spend a few days prior to my session touring places. Even though I may have created my presentation at home, I'm always changing it so that people can see, yes, I've taken the time to learn more about your communities, to learn more about your food, to learn more about your celebrations. When I went to Singapore in November, they were celebrating Diwali. For 2 days, I was going to different restaurants. I was learning about the culture. And in my presentation, I actually had that celebration as well. When I went to Alaska, 2 days prior to my keynote, I went skiing. I did a glacier landing. I've learned about the moose and I learned about indigenous languages. When I began to present on culturally responsive teaching and project-based learning and SEL, I also tailored it to everything I had learned, but also acknowledging the uniqueness about the individual indigenous cultures and languages that are being stripped away. I'm going to Ghana in July. And there's so much that I need to learn about Ghana. And thankfully, I have 3 friends that were born in Ghana that go all the time. And I'm constantly on WhatsApp saying, hey, what else do I need to know about the culture? Because before I can present anything to you, I need to get to know you. And if I can't have one-on-one conversations prior to, then I need to get up and I need to tour. I need to make sure that I fully understand your culture. While I'm in Ghana, I'll be visiting old slave quarters. There's some things that like you said, it's going to be different. Not everyone is from New York. Not everyone speak as fast as I do.
Or with
But
the
also,
lingo, or with the
right.
lingo. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. Now let's get into your consulting business. Yaritza, what do you love most about being an edupreneur? And most importantly, being your own boss?
I feel like I never left the classroom. They usually say when you become an education coach or consultant, some of those ideas or the creativity you had when you were in the classroom, sometimes it lingers away because you're no longer a part of that environment.
Only if you're only doing conferences. You're going into schools and you're working with teaching teams, you stay in the classroom.
But George, let's be honest. Let me take off this professional hat for
All
a
right, let's
second.
keep it 100. I'm taking off my coat, clearing my throat.
When
All right.
educators are in my DMs,
Mhm.
when they ask me for advice, it's usually that. How do I get out of the classroom? How do I do what you're doing? And I usually say, hey, I'm technically still in the classroom because a lot of my work is on pedagogy. In order for me to give teachers advice on teaching, I have to be in the classroom to watch them teach. I do lessons depending on what the school asks. I sit with APs during observations. So I'm technically still in the classroom because
Hold on. Participating in instructional innovation through action research, visiting classrooms, observations, collecting data debriefs is part of action research. A true professional developer is acting as part researcher, part practitioner. That's what my next book is about, by the way. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
So it's like I get these DMs and then I share what I'm doing because people only see that 10-second clip that you've highlighted on your reels or that you've highlighted on Twitter. And so they see, hey, Yaritza is going to Africa. Yes, I'm going to Africa. But before I can speak on global collaboration, I've had to do it. I've taught with my time at Flip, I've taught over 2,000 students across 6 continents at the same time. And by teaching, what I mean is I created every single resource. I differentiated the resources for students. I provided professional development for each teacher that was going to engage in the activities. And then I followed up. People like to assume that what we do is all about presenting in front of groups of people, and it's not. It's about acknowledging that some people need a lot more assistance than just me standing up saying, this is what I've done. It's more of, can we do this together? Let me know your strengths. I'll let you know my strengths. And when we put it together, oh, baby, this is going to be some effective practices. And yeah, I feel as an edupreneur, now with Mackenzie's Adventures, we just became a vendor for New York City Public Schools. So and this is where I started. This is where it all started. So I'll be contracting with New York City Public Schools on curriculum design, curriculum planning, and also working with administrators on how to provide support for teachers.
Oh, congratulations, sis.
Thank
It
you.
is so well deserved. And for people out there that are looking at Yaritza and you want to be an educational consultant, entrepreneur, edupreneur, whatever you want to call it this week, listen. Don't put the cart before the horse. You need the horse to pull the cart. If you want to be a coach, a speaker, accomplish something first, either as a teacher or as an administrator, accomplish something, learn on the job, have some receipts, have some credentials, and then go speak about that. It'll be more impactful.
And also, how are you running away from teaching, but then want to go back to becoming a consultant for teachers? How do you run away? How are you running away? So I didn't run away. So sometimes people be like, and you left. And I'm like, no, it took me 3 years to leave. I worked part-time with Microsoft Flip for 1.5 years while I was pregnant. Then I became an assistant principal, never took maternity leave, still working with Flip. Then I had my baby, literally 1.5 years, and then I took a full-time position. So y'all have to really think about what's more important, building relationships with students, learning more about pedagogy, and then moving on, or fleeing and then coming back and saying that you're an expert, right? And I use that term, and I use that term loosely because I'm still no expert. I'm learning. The more people and educators that I work with, I learn something new all the time. But you can't flee a situation and then want to come back and call yourself the expert, knowing that you left for a reason, right? Whether you couldn't, quote unquote, deal with the students anymore, you couldn't deal with admin, but now you're coming back. And guess what? You have to give advice on how to deal with students with classroom management. You have to deal with admin because they're the ones hiring you. So just think about that. If you're fleeing from a situation, do not put yourself in a place where you have to go back and then change like your title, right? Now I'm an expert of something that I just ran away from. Or are you an expert in running?
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yaritza, have you faced any disappointments in business, and how did you overcome them?
Oh, yeah, every day. So I set goals, and I know everyone is different. I set yearly goals. At the beginning of this year, I had met the goal that I set for the year. For the year, I set the goal of becoming a DOE vendor and making X amount of money. I did that in January. I did that during my month off. I was like, yay, I did it. What can go wrong? What happens is you have to create another goal. Of course, I created a goal that some might think is impossible. And right now I'm still believing that it's possible, but I just wasn't able to achieve it in the time frame that I gave myself. And that's just by getting X amount of contracts. I didn't think things through. And sometimes as CEO or entrepreneur, you want to make sure that you plan everything out, because in your mind, you're also thinking about the people you may have to pay. You're thinking about your time. You're thinking about the fact that you can't be at all places at once. And that's what I'm dealing with, right? I am my only employee, myself and my daughter, because she's also my employee. I can't be everywhere at one time. That took me away from some contracts. And so, yes, disappointing in a sense of there were some schools that really needed my assistance, but because I was being pulled somewhere else, I couldn't really execute those contracts that I had wanted to that would have helped me in making my second goal. But disappointment comes every day, but you have to figure out what's a real win for you. For me, my win is I got what I really initially wanted, which was that vendor license. Everyone is different. Businesses are different. They run different. I always say my business isn't what paid my bills. My business is me being flexible. I have so much fun with it. And on the side, I work with Samsung for education, and that pays my bills. So also balancing how much flexibility you have with your time and with your finances.
So my next question was about your advice for edupreneurs, but I feel like we already gave them a lot of advice, lots of golden nuggets. Any one thing you want to say, or you think we're good?
I could just end it with believe in the impossible. As I mentioned at the beginning, when George started this interview, I didn't think I was going to be here, and I still have ways to go. I'm still trying to make waves in California. I'm still reaching out to people saying, what's next? How can I get this contract in this country or in this specific district? What do I have to do to put myself in those places? I'm doing it by myself. Meaning I'm in front of a computer, I'm doing the research, I'm reaching out to people who love my work, and I'm saying, hey, please send me to the right place. But I know in the back of people's minds, they're thinking this is impossible. And in my mind, I'm like, it's possible. And when I do it, you'll see the tweet about it.
What a perfect way to end the show. Let's put it in the universe. How can people find you, Yaritza, so you can come speak at their conference, school, or event, not just in New York, not just in Singapore, but everywhere?
I'm across socials at Yaritza V _. And I'm also on my website, Mackenzie'sadventures.com/connect.
That's it for this episode. Until next time, this is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with George Valenzuela.